All of our tools were tough march underwater.
It looks like a bomb went off there.
Imagine the biggest storm you've ever been through.
He had to chainsaw his way out his front door.
Cold, hard rain has local creeks and rivers running high.
All this came underneath the doors.
What if the rain didn't stop? A levee breaks. Your neighborhood starts taking on water.
In Sacramento region alone, there's over 514,000 people that are protected by these levees.
Studies suggest that Sacramento is actually one of the top 10 in the nation most at risk for flooding due to rivers.
The most intense atmospheric river storms are likely to become significantly more intense.
And certainly the spillway incident was one of those instances where you did not have time.
Are we prepared? This is Megaflood.
When it started raining in November, people sort of took notice. Winter's coming early. And then right before Christmas, the storms really hit.
For folks living in California in 1861, then 1862, this wasn't a bad dream. It was their nightmare, and their life and livelihood was washed away.
And there proceeded to be continual rain for 43 to 45 days. The storm started with a heavy, cold snow, followed immediately by very warm rain that washed down all that snow.
Shawn Turner is a guide that takes visitors in Old Sacramento back to this time and place of the Great Flood. And to do this, you have to go down, way down to the underground, where the city was originally built.
Because of that heavy amount of water and debris coming down out of the hillsides, that levee was no match. The American River breached the levee approximately where Business 80 is now. The water then came in and flowed behind the city.
Sacramento was inundated and annihilated by the biggest flood they had ever recorded here. Now, as the story goes, life must go on. And in the middle of the Great Flood, we had to swear in a new governor. His name was Leland Stanford, and he lived right here in downtown Sacramento. He had to climb out of his second story into a rowboat to get to the Capitol to be sworn in. The water would remain here for the next 3 months, an unbroken stretch of water for more than 250 to 300 miles.
We're standing next to the foundations for the Hastings building, Benjamin Franklin Hastings and Company building. This building has been lifted up to the current level. This was a 500-ton brick building. That was one of the hundreds of buildings that were lifted over a 13-year span to lift the central business district up out of the floodwaters.
Since the Great Flood of California and the lifting of Sacramento, we haven't yet seen the water rise that high. But we know there will be another time. As chaotic as California weather can be, it's also consistent. And history tells us well before we could document it that these floods happen every 100 years or so, and more are coming. The confidence of catastrophe casting lies in our understanding of the main ingredient of these floods, atmospheric rivers, or ARs.
An atmospheric river is literally a river in the sky. It's just a river of water vapor moved by the wind, rather than a terrestrial river, which is liquid moved by gravity.
Marty Ralph is an expert on atmospheric rivers and says calling these ribbons of moisture a river is not an exaggeration. In fact, it might be understating California's primary source of water.
An average atmospheric river transports the equivalent of like 25 Mississippi rivers worth of water. It's vapor. When that hits shore or hits the mountains, it's forced upward, and some of that can condense into cloud and rain and snow in vast quantities.
40 to 60% of California water comes from ARs. If you get less than you expect, you're in a drought. More, and you flood. Much of the research lately is focused on forecasting atmospheric rivers, especially the super high-end ones that can break the flood banks. The Great Flood was the blueprint for a mega flood scenario called the ArcStorm Project back in 2011, a collaboration of more than 100 scientists and officials. At the time, it was the best understanding of the worst-case scenario. The report was sobering to say the least. A cycle of major atmospheric rivers would, quote, overwhelm the state's flood protection system. It would also prompt evacuations for more than 1 million people and cause nearly $1 trillion in damage, 3 times the damage of a major California earthquake. In short, a flood of this magnitude is California's biggest threat. Also, just like that earthquake, we know it's coming. Except the future with megafloods is likely to be worse. Dr. Daniel Swain is a climate scientist at UCLA and co-author of essentially ArcStorm 2.0. What does a megaflood look like in our warming climate? Well, he found that these storms are now twice as likely to happen in any given year right now. And in the future, we can expect 2 to 4 times more runoff and flooding potential than we have historically ever observed.
They're warmer, and this ends up being a really critical aspect in the Sierra Nevada in particular, because not only are you seeing atmospheric rivers that bring more water overall, but more of that water is falling as liquid rain rather than frozen snow.
The report has brought our history with megafloods back to the future, and understanding that California's other big one is coming and we need to be ready.